It's October, and we're at the Flywheel Antique Tractor and Machinery Show in Lake Hamilton, Arkansas. It's a get-together that residents hold every year. They have food, a bonfire, and some bluegrass. That's Chief Simpson, head of the local volunteer fire department, and that's some of his crew. The guy in the plaid shirt tagging along looking a little out of place, that's me, Michael Fenimore. To the naked eye, it looks like the chief is having a good time. And well, he is. But he's doing something else. He is also fighting a wildfire right now. At this very moment, his volunteers are working to help save lives and property. As a matter of fact, they're probably doing as much today as they might at an actual wildfire. How can that be, you ask? Good question. One we set out to answer. Our story opens up with a basic math problem, one you might be familiar with. Now, most small and volunteer fire departments have limited resources, a few engines, and a small crew to staff them. Now, as you know, this setup works perfectly well when you have 1 or 2 homes burning, or a small brush fire. What about when a nightmarish scenario happens and a large wildfire threatens dozens or even hundreds of homes in your community? Now, how can you protect those homes with just 1 or 2 engines? The math just doesn't add up. Several volunteer firefighters at the get-together drove home this point.
Our biggest problem with the math issue is it's the manpower. We have several engines in our company. We have probably 20 trucks. We don't always have drivers for all of our trucks.
Even when this summer we called in, basically the whole county fire departments were called in to fight a 400-acre fire. We didn't have enough personnel and equipment to protect every house that was threatened.
Sound familiar? Any fire department would become quickly overwhelmed during a wildfire with so many structures involved. The good news is that the volunteer fire chiefs today are finding creative ways to stretch their limited resources so that the math does add up. So, we set out to find out exactly what these fire chiefs are doing to solve this problem. Our first stop is here at Lake Hamilton. Oh, spoiler alert. It involves fighting a fire long before the fire ever starts. The fire department in Lake Hamilton, Arkansas is responsible for protecting 48 square miles and a population that reaches 20,000 in the summer months. I wanted to find out how Chief Simpson could defend an area this size during a large wildfire. His answer was simple and direct.
FireWise is the best preventive tool that we've found. Fortunately, our community has embraced it for the most part. When you have limited resources during the week, you get 5 or 6 people out there to a fire. If the homes are FireWise, the homeowners have taken those steps, we can take 1 engine and protect multiple structures in a subdivision type setting. But if it's not FireWise and the vegetation's grown up, flashy fuels, brushy, we may have to have multiple engines to save 1 structure, and at some point, we're going to lose.
The chief's solution? Convince residents to take responsibility for protecting their own homes with preventive measures. So tell me, what's your best tool to communicate to residents on how they can protect their property?
FireWise Days, the community outreach events. You know, the fire service is built on the tradition of families, and we try to have family-oriented FireWise Days with activities for the young and the old. We deliver the message to them and tell them the importance of FireWise, pass out the handouts in the literature, and it's really caught hold. People are embracing the idea.
And that is precisely what the chief was doing when I first met him. He was giving FireWise information to neighbors at a community event and fighting the next wildfire by making their homes FireWise. Chief Simpson's mathematical reasoning goes like this. His fire department has enough engines to protect a few homes during a small fire, but there's no way he can send an engine to every home in business during a large wildfire. So the chief needed a strategy to protect entire neighborhoods with just a small force. His solution? Convince individuals to make basic FireWise improvements that'll make their homes and businesses far more likely to survive a wildfire with minimal or even no intervention. The less manpower each individual property needs, the more he can stretch his resources. To find out if his message was getting out, I visited a densely settled community called Diamond Head. Hi, Mike.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing just fine. This is the home of Michael Fikes, a longtime Diamond Head resident.
The local fire chief made us very aware of the fact that we live in a rural area, and so therefore it takes time for the response teams to get here. We're more susceptible to fires. It became very apparent that, hey, we need to take ownership of what's going on, not just depend on someone else to do that for us.
So what percentage of homes here do you think have taken steps to be fire-wise?
I would guess somewhere between 80 and 90%, if not more.
Wow. And what are some of the things that they did?
Many of the people made sure that their lots were cleaned up, that the brush was cleaned up close to their homes.
Chief Simpson and his crew were smart. They got their message across by talking with residents where they live and congregate.
All of the groups in our church have been informed. Actually, every organization in Diamond Head has been informed. They have met with each club, each group of ladies and men and whatnot, and have discussed with us the importance of the FireWise program for us as individuals and as a total community.
When you don't have the resources you need, you draw upon the resources you do have in abundance, your residents. As you can see, the residents are very receptive to the chief's suggestions and are willing to make the basic FireWise improvements to the property. All of this reminded me of something Julie and Bill Heck told me earlier about how this outreach helps them do their job.
When there's a fire, when we go in the homes FireWise, it's easier to protect it.
It gives the fire department a few more minutes of working time to save the residents. Gives us time to get and set a defensible perimeter up on the house to defend the structure from burning.
This also enables crews to be more effective at putting out new starts later on during the mopping up phase. As I talk to firefighters, I learned that becoming FireWise is actually part of a bigger goal. They are creating an entire fire-adapted community. They are taking actions to reduce wildfire risk to all of Lake Hamilton's important assets, not just homes, but commercial properties, as well as infrastructure, such as utilities and even public spaces. It's a big project, but the chief is getting help. Programs such as Ready, Set, Go and FireWise provide all kinds of free information to help him and you make communities more adapted to wildland fire. By reaching out and convincing neighbors to make their property FireWise, this small fire department has made this community more likely to withstand a wildfire. Next, we'll visit a community that faced a devastating fire. And because they planned ahead, they saved a lot of lives. This is Wrist Canyon, a small community just outside Fort Collins, Colorado. They know something about wildfire. Recently, they experienced a horrendous fire. Driving in, I saw reminders of it everywhere. Boy, it must have been tough driving through this, trying to get to the fire to combat it. 259 homes were lost, but at the same time, many survived, some without any help from firefighters. In Arkansas, I learned the theory of adapting structures to survive wildfire without active intervention. Here was a chance to ask Chief Bob Gann how the theory worked in reality.
The houses that had done protective measures, created defensible spaces, first it did one thing is the house was more likely to survive the fire front as it came through. When the main fire came through and it was unsafe for anybody to be there, the house survived.
As in Arkansas, these defensible spaces were the result of the chief and his crew talking to residents.
As a fire department, we can respond to emergencies, but we can't go out and prepare the houses. It really does come down to the residents have to take the step to protect their own homes, because we're not going to be able to do that for everybody.
It must be a challenge as a volunteer fire department to put in the time and effort to pre-plan.
It is, but we also recognize it's one of our jobs. The other thing is that pre-planning will pay off during the emergency. So it saves us time in the long run, and it keeps people safer, which is what we're ultimately about. We do a lot of education programs around that. We send out newsletters, we have a web page, we send out emails. We have a slash chipping program where people can bring in a slash, which is cut off limbs where they've cleaned the properties of the trees around their property, and we will chip that up.
The fire had put FireWise principles to the test, and they had worked. The chief then took me to visit 2 homes that survived the fire on their own.
This is Carol. She's one of my firefighters, captain in the department.
Carol, how do you do?
Hi, nice to meet you.
I'm looking around here and I'm seeing a lot of the devastation from the wildfire, but yet I look at your house and it looks unscathed. How did you not get hit by the fire?
Well, the fire went by here, came as close as any fire's ever come to my house. I often say it was a combination of luck and mitigation that saved my house.
So what did you do prior to the fire to help the house?
Probably the first thing was just thinning trees, and at first it was really hard because you're sort of attached to the landscape. We've done gravel pathways so you don't have fire impinging directly on your siding. I have wood siding, but try to keep the fire from getting right up to the house.
Her efforts had clearly paid off, but I was curious about what it was like trying to persuade her neighbors to take FireWise measures.
And I've heard a lot of people say, don't make me cut all my trees. And I say, you don't have to cut them all, but you do have to think about strategically which ones you want. And the ones you want to keep, you need to get the fuels up off the ground. And I've had a lot of resistance. I was just talking to a woman the other day who said, my husband will never let me cut our trees. And that's really frustrating. Okay, then you have to acknowledge that you're willing to sacrifice your house for those trees. It's really the trade-off that you're making.
It's really incumbent to us to reach out to our neighbors and talk to them, mention things that they can do to mitigate their house. If you see something, you might want to think about that. It's something we need to do either as firefighters or as members of the department who volunteer in a non-firefighting capacity.
You have to be a little careful, but sometimes it just comes up in the course of conversation. Fire safe is what people want, and you can't really say that. I can't say that if I cut every tree around my house will be here, because we don't know that. But you can increase your odds dramatically, and that's the context I try to put it in.
I think it'd be much easier, being, a fellow resident.
Yes.
Correct. You're not the guy coming in from outside trying to tell me how to do my business.
You're not from the building department.
Right.
Right.
When we came up,
I learned that you don't have to tell residents to do everything at once. Begin with simple, inexpensive things such as cleaning gutters and thinning vegetation. Later, folks can take further preventive action. The point is to get people started and invested. I also learned the Ready, Set, Go program will guide you through the process of talking with residents, convincing them to prepare their own action plan before a wildfire occurs. Next, we talk to Ryan and Christine Hodek.
It's still a shock to go through a fire, but to come back and see your home, right, that's such a good feeling.
The Hodeks had taken the initiative to learn how to adapt their home to fire.
Because of all the research I had done, I was like, our house darn well better be standing with everything we had invested and all the work we had done. I was really hoping it would still be there, because then it meant everything had paid off and all those practices really can benefit. That said, this fire was so crazy, it's not a guarantee, but
it increases your chances.
It definitely increased our chances.
In order to receive a certificate of occupancy, the county required Chief Gann to approve their landscaping, something that you might look into for your own community.
He had come out and ensured that they had access all the way around the house, and that he also gave us some advice on some additional trees that we would need to clear over time to even improve our landscaping. But having the fire chief come out and walk and kind of do a sign off was just kind of that added comfort for me to know.
The fire destroyed most of the trees on their property, but their home survived. Sadly, that couldn't be said for many of their neighbors.
Well, knowledge is key. If you could go to your local authorities and they had the resources there available to you that homeowners could pick up, read, review, you're more apt to get it done, right? And then you have that accountability, the natural relationship already started, where they can then come out subsequently and evaluate the work that you've done. One-stop shopping would have made makes everyone's life easier.
Before I left Risk Canyon, I dropped in on their annual Labor Day Mountain Festival. It's a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department and another great opportunity to spread the word.
You know, the fire department puts out a lot of information about where you can go and educate yourself.
The firefighters really take the lead in telling people where to get some of the information. The fire departments are such a part of the community. A lot of people really pay attention to what they're doing and listen to what they tell them.
The more I talked with firefighters, the more I realized that the best way to educate residents is to build on your existing relationships. Just do what you do every day. Talk with your neighbors and keep an eye out for them.
All the firefighters, as they drive around this community, the first thing they see is, whether a home is defensible or not. It's like, it's automatic. You just look at it and say, that guy needs to, get rid of some ladder fuel or, get that firewood away from his house.
As in most things, kind of a moderate approach works. People look at it, they say, you tell me to cut down all my trees around my house, I'm going to say no. And somebody says, well, if you want to save this tree, treat this as part of the structure. So you build a defensible space around those trees. So you can have beautiful landscaping and a fire-safe environment at the same time.
Here at Risk Canyon, we've seen a volunteer fire department that has found ways to make their community safer, despite their limited resources. Next, we'll visit a small fire department that is using other creative means of stretching their resources. Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes. With all this water and greenery, it'd be easy to be lulled into a wildfire can't happen here mindset. But the folks in Itasca County aren't fooled. A recent windstorm knocked down thousands of trees, which severely increased the fuel load and the risk of wildfire. I talked with Davin Tinquist, chief of the Cohasset, Minnesota Volunteer Fire Department.
Here in Itasca County, the volunteer fire department's main function in wildland response is structure protection. The actual wildland fire is DNR responsibility, but we still respond to everything: grass fires, brush fires, forest fires.
With over 4,500 residents in Cohasset and 112 square miles to cover, Chief Tinquist and his neighboring fire chiefs face the same math problem as you probably do.
You can never have enough equipment, you can never have enough manpower, you never have enough buildings to store what you need. And in turn, that relates right to the money. You can't have enough because you don't have the funding for that.
So how did Tinquist and the county's fire chiefs address this problem?
We have to look down the road of shared services. Who can we partner with so that we can share this cost? Who's got the equipment that we need so that we don't have to buy the equipment? Who's got extra manpower so we can team up on that?
So Itasca County's 19 rural fire departments formed a fire chiefs group. They also cultivated partnerships with local organizations.
One of the things that we can be very fortunate in our area is that Grand Rapids really is recognized as a hub for natural resources. We have a tremendous pool here of researchers, of forest practitioners. We're really fortunate to have the Minnesota Interagency Fire Center, and that is a regional hub of activity. It combines BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Minnesota DNR, and all of those people coming together to work on keeping everyone safe.
One of the key parts of creating a fire-adapted community is developing a community wildfire protection plan. For this community, it was an opportunity to consolidate their knowledge and plans into a single resource.
The Community Wildfire Protection Plan is quite a thick document. After we got all together putting it together, we collaborated with all of these partners and developed First of all, to get the scope of what all of our resources that are available in the county for fire protection, both structural fire protection and wildfire protection. And then we did a lot of looking at how historically where the fire problems were. The FireWise committee determined which areas were high danger areas within the county based on fuel vegetation and interspersed wildland-urban interface.
As they developed the CWPP, they utilized resources from the Fire Adapted Communities website. It is an online resource that provides wildfire safety information and tools from a national coalition of organizations. The group collected information on homes, businesses, infrastructure, and forest.
We decided to do home assessments, and we had the fire departments help us with that, 19 fire departments. So each fire department would cover their own fire coverage area. So we started breaking it down within our county that we have. We were able to break it down to where it was a manageable project.
Itasca County isn't alone. Every fire department has organizations and talent it can partner with. You just have to identify and reach out to them. Itasca County has something else your community may have: seasonal residents who come to enjoy the outdoors. And with the recent windstorm, it made communicating with them all the more important.
Cohasset, Minnesota is 4,500 people normally. During the summer months, we get a huge tourism, so we can up to triple our population with seasonal residents coming back to their cabins. The challenge is, what happened over the winter? Nobody's been there. Are these driveways still accessible? How many blowdowns do we have?
We'll work with them probably for 4 or 5 months during the summer, and that's the time they have to do their work on site.
One of Itasca County's most successful events is Chipper Days. The deal works like this. If residents clear up vegetation on their property, the county will pick it up and chip it free of charge.
They come out with their equipment, and these piles are pretty big. And in comes this truck when the guy sits up there and operates this boom, and in about 5 minutes, that 2 or 3 weeks worth of work is in the truck and on its way to be chipped.
It is a feel-good program that people know that they're helping keep their families safe, they're helping their neighbors live in a safer place, their neighborhoods.
The result? 50% of participants removed hazardous fuels and created defensible spaces around their homes, making future firefighting more effective. So far, we've seen how small fire departments have found ways to reduce risk to property from the next wildfire. But that's only part of the equation. As we learned earlier, creating a fire-adapted community involves personal safety, too. Remember the Wrist Canyon fire? Even though they lost 259 homes, the fire department evacuated the community.
We're the locals. And our job as a fire department shifts from fighting the fire to getting the people away from the fire.
Once again, planning ahead of time makes all the difference.
We do a lot of education with our residents, and have for many years, to teach them about what to do in an evacuation.
And if you see a situation that you think may be dangerous, you don't need to wait for us to tell you to evacuate. Oh, no. You don't need to wait for that 911
What do you need to take? What do you need to prepare? How do you evacuate? When is there time to maybe take some things with you? When is it you just need to get in your car and go? We'll roll up to a house, and they will see us appear, and they'll know immediately, you're here to tell us to leave, right? And the answer is yes. And so we don't have to spend a lot of time explaining. The questions are minimal.
How did the pre-planning for the evacuation work out?
I think it worked out well. People knew what to expect. They knew what was going to happen in an evacuation, so they were ready to evacuate, and they responded to the firefighters well. We do use reverse 911, so a lot of times before we got to the house, they had already heard about it. In general, we got everybody out. We had one lady, unfortunately, who didn't evacuate. She did receive her 911. And she was somewhat of a challenge situation. We actually knew about her. One of my firefighters knew about her and radioed. We attempted to get to her house, but the fire would not let us get through. And so she perished.
The fire department knew to look for her because they had taken time to map out every home in the area, and they had identified elderly and disabled residents who might need assistance.
We were able to tell them, this is what the terrain's like. This is where your escape routes are. We even provided maps very detailed, important maps for them, and we're able to show them locations. And we know our terrain, we know where homes are, we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are.
What could have been chaos wasn't, because a small volunteer fire department had a detailed plan in place. It also allowed them to maximize the resources during the crisis. Rist Canyon isn't unique. Someday you may need to evacuate your community too. The program Ready, Set, Go will help you educate residents to prepare action plans, understand dangerous situations, and safely follow evacuation plans. Because nothing is more important than your community's safety. We visited 3 small communities across the country, and they had a lot in common. Each one was situated in the wildland-urban interface. Each one was protected by a small fire department, and none of them had the math in their favor. So each volunteer fire department stretched its resources by working closely with residents. They made homes and businesses more likely to survive a wildfire, created partnerships, wrote CWPPs, and taught safety preparedness. To guide them, the fire chiefs accessed fire-adapted community materials, including information from Firewise and Ready, Set, Go programs.
We've recently joined Ready, Set, Go, and we're tying that program into our Firewise efforts, hoping to eventually reach the fire-adapted community level, where we have everybody ready in the event of that disaster.
We've worked very hard to become what you might call a fire-adapted community. Recognize that we are people living in the forest. The forest is going to have fires. It's inevitable. So we need to be prepared to deal with that, both as a resident and as a firefighter.
You don't have to do everything at once. Start with simple things that don't require money. Talk with your friends and neighbors. Work on getting your high-risk neighborhoods recognized as Firewise communities. Then build on that momentum to address other critical issues. Ultimately, the goal is to make your community better adapted to the inevitability of wildfire. In the end, you can make the math work. You can protect your neighbors and communities with limited resources. It just takes planning ahead of time and the recognition that the best time to fight a wildfire is long before the smoke appears on the horizon.